Great. So I have with me today Dr. Lola Gershfeld from Emotional Connection, emcleaders.com. I'm going to pretend that I know nothing about EMC or emotional connection just for the purpose of this. So I guess my job here is to just find out more about it from you, Lola, in your words. Um, what is EMC? What is emotional connection?
Well, I think EMC to me is a newly evolving structured approach where people can use it to create better relationships, to get out of conflict, to move forward, to repair the relationships, and to create a better way of communicating with each other. It is deeply rooted in attachment to optimize teams and get the best out of each person, and you could say that it gets people back to positive communication because when they get stuck, it's really difficult for them to know how to get out of that positive communication. So it really focuses on the emotional messages that people send to each other. And in a way, when you use the EMC approach and you use the tools and the roadmap in the EMC process, people start to tune in to each other better. They start to tune in to themselves better so they can understand how they impact each other. I think this is biggest problem in work. When people work together, they don't understand how much they impact each other and how much they need to repair their uh, relationship or the messages that they send to each other. So I think EMC provides a very structured, systematic, and repeatable approach that people can use over and over and over again to clarify what is it that what's happening with them, or maybe how they got hurt and how they can repair that hurt.
Okay. So there's lots of things I'd like to pick up on there. When you say people and you mentioned workplace, who is this for?
Well, I think number one, I always say, managers are the key kind of attachment figures. So I feel like managers are the most important people to learn how to navigate team members when they feel, when they complain, or when they judge each other, or when they don't want to talk to each other, or they get really stuck with working together. So I think managers play a big role on how to help team members to have that repair moment or bonding moment. So I would say number one is for managers. Number two is for team members. Anytime when you work with a team, again, you depend on each other, you impact each other, and you need to know how to navigate through some of the difficulties or some of the miscommunication that happens. Often people get stuck in content, trying to prove each other wrong.
Mm,
So what the emotional connection process does is really takes the content out, or maybe it starts with content, but it more focuses on the emotional experience. And what we know from science, from attachment science, from the science of emotions, that when you really help people to talk about the vulnerabilities in a safe way, talk about the emotions on a really detailed level in terms of like surface emotions, softer emotions, and primary emotions, and really get to give them space to express it, to share their experience. That helps them to be heard, to be understood, to feel like you care about them, you matter to them, that they're important to you, and that makes a big difference in their own nervous system, in their own emotional understanding, and it helps them to feel that that they're not alone. And I think that's
mm,
the biggest fear for people, is that they are alone in that experience. So they get very anxious or they get depressed.
okay. And I'm imagining, like typically emotions have not been spoken about in the workplace. And I hear you here talking about kind of going into emotions in depth and layers, really, and going into the more vulnerable emotions. What with the people that you've worked with and the companies that you've worked with, what has the outcome been? How have they, first of all, are they scared to do it? And then secondly, what's it like when they come out the other side?
Well, I think it has been wrong of us to ignore emotions. And this is one of the things that we're starting to understand, that emotions are very powerful. They move us to action. They move us into the way we behave with each other. And that language of emotions, we really need to make a friend of it because emotions are so critical in our way of how our brain works. And so, yeah, people may be a little bit scared because it's unusual, it's unfamiliar. You have to talk about your emotions that you are not used to. And what I think is really, really helpful with this process is that we have the tools. We have the tools with a list of emotions or a list of raw spots. And those tools really help people to be more competent and confident when they talk about it. We're not asking them, it's not catharsis where you cry and just like become hysterical about it. No, you feel like this is a very professional way to express yourself, and emotions travel with us. They come with us to work. And more and more we learn that when people feel more emotionally connected with each other, they become much more collaborative, they listen better, they work better, they become more healthier in their own way. It's good for well-being. It's good for engaging. So everything, we're starting to understand that our brain, our amygdala, the emotional part of the brain, really controls everything in our brain, even in our prefrontal cortex. So when we don't have a way to share those emotions, we get really stuck. We get stuck in those perpetual negative cycles. What we call is just like talking about content, trying to prove the other person wrong, trying to blame, criticize, judge. We use all those protective behaviors because we're not getting to the emotions.
Mm.
And once we have the language for emotions, once we have these tools, what I see happening is that number one, people relax. Number two, people feel really understood, like they understand about their own, what's happening for them. And they also send a clear message to the other person. So the other person doesn't have to be wondering or trying to guess what's happening for them. And it becomes actually safer for people to talk about emotions, because when you talk about vulnerabilities, uh, people become less guarded on the other
Mm.
side. They become
Mm.
less defensive. It's no longer you attacking them. You're really sharing what has happened for them in terms of their experience. And I think what Brene Brown, I think she said, when you come from a vulnerable place, it's hard not to listen.
Yeah.
So I think it pulls people closer, and I have seen huge, huge improvements, transformation, where people would not want to talk to each other. Suddenly they start to look at each other. Suddenly they start to come closer. They start to feel comfortable with each other. And it's like, the blocks move away, the ice melts away, and they start to feel good about working together.
Wow.
To me, that's just like, wow. It's the most,
Yeah.
it is the most rewarding thing that I have ever seen, is to take people through the process. And
Yeah.
it's just a blessing, really. It's an honor.
Wow. It makes a lot of sense how you explain it all. I'm wondering, can you explain a little bit more about the negative cycle that you mentioned there, Lola?
Yes. So everything that we do in EMC is based on the attachment theory. And what attachment theory tells us is that our relationships, our connection with people that we depend on, are very, very important to us. This is what provides us a lifeline to our survival. That's kind of like it's bred in our bones. It is part of our survival code. So attachment really tells us that when we lose that connection, emotional connection, we go into what we call a separation distress. And we start to behave in two different ways. We either start to pursue that connection, or we start to withdraw to preserve the connection. This is so interesting that both people actually want the connection back. But the strategies they use either pursue the connection, which means that they start to feel anxious, right? They start to feel like they start to complain or blame or judge, criticize. And it's hard for people to even recognize that they're actually doing those things.
Nice. Yeah.
Because when I come and vent, people start like, oh, you're venting. No, no, I'm being anxious about the disconnection. Yeah, so the way that we go about using these strategies, like for pursuers, it's like I said, criticize, blame, judge. It's actually perpetuates the negative cycle. It actually fuels the negativity. It makes the other person look dangerous. The other side, for withdrawers, what do? They avoid, they shut down. And it's not because they don't want to talk, it's because they get overwhelmed with emotions. So it's very difficult for them to talk about anything. So what do? They have learned to get off the dance floor. This is what we look at interaction as a dance, and emotion is the music. So when people get either anxious with emotions, they start to pursue the connection because they have lost that connection, or they become withdrawers where they want to preserve the connection, so they avoid, they don't want to talk about it. And the difficult part is both people are contributing to the negative cycle. So the more the withdrawer withdraws, the more the pursuer becomes more anxious. So the more the pursuer becomes more anxious, the more the withdrawer withdraws. So if you can understand, this is what we call pursue withdraw cycle.
Right.
And the more they get more into this negative cycle, they start to feel more alone and isolated. They start to feel exhausted. Their performance goes down, their motivation goes down. Everything in their work becomes very difficult to do. And so, what we start to understand is when you use the emotions, when you start to kind of slow things down, you make space for people to really recognize what is happening for them, they start to de-escalate that cycle. So they sort of put a cap on that negative cycle, and they start to learn the new steps in the dance, what they can do to create more positive cycle, to repair their connection, to come back to the dance floor and learn how to listen to that music. So emotion is the music. If you want to change a dance, you have to change the music. You
Yeah.
can't teach people to dance a tango where there's, salsa music is playing or something. So by learning, by understanding the language of emotions, understanding their automatic thoughts and protective behaviors, they start to feel more equipped to use the new steps, and they want to be connected, right? We
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
that there's a longing for connection, so people will take risks, and they do those things because there's a need for connection with people we depend on. Again, and it is a very transformative experience for people to use.
It makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Thank you for explaining it so well, that negative cycle and then the positive cycle and the dance. I wonder, sometimes people don't recognize that they need the other person or that the relationship is important even, and there's kind of this attitude that I can get on without them, I'll just keep them at arm's length, I'll be, I'll put on the professional veneer and I'll be polite and I'll be nice, but I don't trust you and I don't particularly like you, and I might bitch about you over here to somebody else. And I see that happening in the workplace. What would you say to that, for for people think that they know that I don't care about that relationship, that's not important to me, when but actually we know they're still stressing.
This is very common, Niamh. And I worked with a particular team, a finance team, and one of the managers says, I don't need to have a relationship with my boss, just like what you said. I'm here to do my job. Well, I think through the process, what she started to recognize and make the connection is that because she doesn't think that she needs to have a relationship with her boss, she started to go around her boss, and she could not come to her boss, and she stopped talking to her boss, and over time she started to develop a lot of problems. She started to have health issues. She couldn't sleep at night. She started to feel not valued and not important, even though she worked with this company for 8 years. Is when she broke that connection with her boss, she started to lose that feedback loop where we start to feel we do feel like we're valued, we're important, the other person cares about us. And so I explain to people, yes, maybe you think you don't need it, but your brain needs that relationship for it to thrive, for it to continue to perform. And as she started to have these bonding conversations, what we call, where they can share the vulnerability, she started to feel better about herself. She started to be more enthusiastic about her work. She started to perform better. Everything started to fit, even health-wise. She developed all kinds of ailments because of the loss of that relationship. And people don't recognize how important, how I think how detrimental these relationships are to us. I remember interviewing another a CEO of this huge company, and he said that he used to have a friend who started the company with him, and they worked together for 15 years. They built this company from like I don't know, 6 million to $6 billion. And over time, something happened in their relationship. And this friend was one of the executives on the team. And there was a disconnect. And he did not know, the CEO did not know how to go about it. So he avoided it. And the more he avoided it, the more the executive started to be more disengaged. So he would come to meetings and not talk, not engaged. And over time, he started to have performance issues. Well, the CEO still didn't know how to repair the relationship, so he just let him go. Years later, as he is telling me about this experience, he said, "This is one of the most regretful things in my whole career. I still think about that relationship." So I always tell people, even if you have to let go somebody, or if you want to leave the company, always repair the relationship, because it will go with us. This is what makes us confident in life. Makes us who we are. It's our relationships. It's like we are fish, and relationships are water. So if you don't heal our relationships, it will have a negative impact on our well-being. So no matter what happens, always fix the relationships, repair the relationships, do the process, because it only will make you stronger as a person, as a leader, as a team member.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Let me see if any other questions. I mean, there's lots of different questions that I could throw at you, but I think what you shared already is really valuable. Is there anything else that you think people need to know to understand what EMC is all about? I suppose one question is even, like, if I were to bring you into my business now, what would you be doing? What does that look like when you come in? Or why would I bring you in the first place? Maybe.
Well, I think number one is education, right? People need to learn and be educated how our brain works, how emotions impact our behavior. How do we impact each other? Why our relationships are so important? How do we get into these negative cycles? What are the steps into the positive cycles? So I think education is number one. If people want to improve their culture, improve their team performance, improve the just overall well-being and thriving in their company, they need to know this process. Otherwise, they get stuck. I mean, I remember being an HR manager or as a CFO or even a board member. We would have these long meetings with no progress, and I would never think about that it was about emotions. It's like, you know, my husband and I, we've been married for 42 years, and when we had our 25th year anniversary, we decided to go to Costa Rica, and we were going through this rainforest, and a guide stopped me suddenly and said, "Lola, don't move." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Look at the bottom of by your foot." And I'm looking like I don't see anything. It's just leaves everywhere. And he said, "Look." And I'm like looking and I don't see anything. And he said, "Are you crazy? What you have is what you think is a stone is a bird. What you think is a stick is a long tail. This is a nightjar, and a nightjar is a bird that nests on the floor of the forest."
Oh.
And I suddenly I saw the bird. So the same thing in our workplace. Emotion is the most powerful thing in the room when things happening. Emotion is also the most powerful agent of change. What's the difference between me and the guide? The guide knew what to look for.
Mm.
People at work need to see that emotion, need to learn how to look at that. What is happening behind the words when people are saying things? What is happening behind the behavior? What is going on?
Yes.
We are so trained to right away look at one person as a problem.
Mm.
They are
Yeah.
causing all the problem. Or this person, they're not saying, they just maybe disengage and let's just leave them alone. We are so trained to respond to these behaviors in the wrong way. We have to rewire our brain to say, wait a second, people are behaving because they have lost their connection. People are struggling and don't know how to get out of that stuck place because they don't know how to tune into their emotions, or they don't know how to talk about it. So I feel like the EMC process, because it's based on attachment, on the emotional connection, on the science of emotions, it really lays out a roadmap. It's like taking a flight. When you go to the flight, the plane, we know the plane works. We know how the pilot knows how to get us from place to place. They know how to deal with turbulence. The same thing here. EMC is that roadmap that will know how to get people back to safety, how to get people back to connection, how to get people back to performing, to thriving. That's how it is. It is so systematic, so predictable. I mean, every time I use the EMC process with a team, I know I'm going to be successful because I know it works.
Mhm.
So people will bring us because of education. They bring us because if there's any stuck places, if there's any workplace conflict, and equipping. I think just, helping managers to have these tools is a huge, huge thing. And not only managers, everybody,
Yeah,
everybody in the company.
everybody. I mean, I
Yeah,
can see the scope for this. I mean, I I'm familiar with it, of course, but for viewers, it's like, when you talk, I like just think, oh, pre-marriage courses need this, parents need this, everybody needs these tools, these tools to deal with our emotions and be able to communicate more effectively when emotions are firing off and firing off our actions and our behaviors without our awareness often. And then it's all happening on the surface and we're not aware of what's happening underneath, and we're just reacting to what's happening on the surface, and getting stuck into that negative cycle. So yeah, it certainly
exactly.
seems to me like a tool that everybody could use because conflict is everywhere in every workplace. And even if it's not conflict, as you speak about disconnection, do you want to maybe just clarify what do you see as the difference between maybe a disconnect versus conflict? That sometimes people might not recognize something as conflict, but this could still be useful, I believe.
I think it's always starts with a disconnection. Disconnection is when you get hurt or when you feel like you have been suddenly feel devalued or some sort of ignored or not appreciated in a way. There's a disconnection, and people often don't pay attention to those disconnections. So they start to put a block. Like I was working with one particular team, and the CEO says, well, I just learned to put a block between myself and the other person. You know, every time I hear them saying, well, you didn't do this wrong, boom, I put a block. And next time she said, you didn't do this wrong, I put another block. So she said, like, over time, I have all these blocks around me, and I don't really want to talk to this person. So I disengage. But then I feel alone. I feel all this weight. I get stuck. I don't know how to move out of that. I don't know how to remove these blocks. So I think disconnections are when they happen and people don't know what to do with it, they become either anxious or they have the blocks.
You're into the cycle then, yeah. So
Right,
that person
there's a
is
cycle. So
withdrawing.
conflict, we look conflict as an inflammation. The virus is emotional disconnection. So conflict is when people are, even when with withdrawers, they push, they hold their emotions, and what happens then? They explode. And then they withdraw again, and they don't say, and then they explode. Well, pursuers, they are actively anxious all the time. But every time the withdrawers stops talking to them, they become more anxious, more anxious, more anxious. So there's the conflict, right? The conflict is getting hotter, more warmer, more explosive. And you already see that people are in the negative cycle, like the tornado is taking over. The negative cycle has taken over the relationship. By learning to repair the disconnect early and right away, you start to actually create a more healing ground, more healing relationship where it heals that disconnection and creates a relationship that where you can heal from the outside traumas or from the outside injuries that you might have. And when we work together, there's vulnerabilities all the time. We make mistakes, we feel embarrassed, we feel like we don't, we feel rejected. So our biggest fear is to have these rejections, to be rejected by people we depend on. So if we can't come to the people that we work with and share those vulnerabilities and feel supported and feel nurtured and feel repaired, we're going to be very, very fragile. And so we're going to be insecure in ourselves. So all of these connections actually provide us more security, more confidence to go out in the world and take risks and come back, and to know that we have the safe haven and secure base where people will accept us, will support us, will help us to repair those little raw spots that hit us when we go out and talk to the clients or go out and talk to other team members. So our team members and our managers are extremely important to us.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
those relationships are key. It's our water that we can swim and thrive.
That makes so much sense, Lola. Thank you for explaining it so well. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that you think people need to know?
Well, I think one of the things that I want people to know is that it takes a lot of practice. A lot of practice. And I cannot stress enough about the practice. You can learn knowledge is like, is I remember taking a yoga class, and this yoga guru talked about that, when I teach you things, it's only 5%. 95% is practice, just like in yoga, right? So the same thing with EMC. You have to practice over and over again. You have to trust the process, because the process works. There's no question about it. I have done over 1,000 training sessions with people, and it works every single time. And it becomes part of you, right? When you start to use the responses, you understand the language of emotions, it becomes part of your language, and it becomes part of your daily conversations. And this is what we want. We want people to use it in their daily conversation, so it becomes them. And so practice is number one. Yes, at times people will reject it. Yes, at times people will feel like, oh, this is so uncomfortable. And yes, we know that we're tapping into the most significant thing in human beings is that emotional connection. And I had a team where one person would, not share his emotions for 8 months. He would just come and watch how other people did it. And after 8 months, he came and he said, I want to share my emotions. What happened to me? Because we know people want to do that. They just have not had a practice. They have not had a role model on what does it look like? What does it feel like? So it becomes very scary for them to do that. But with practice and reassurance and trust in the process, you start to feel more competent and confident in using it, and you start to actually see how relationships start to change. And that is so satisfying, so rewarding. I
Yeah, I
love
mean,
it.
there's so
It's
much in
I just
there.
love it. I can talk about it for hours and for days because I see the difference it makes in people, and it just makes me feel so like I can fly.
Wonderful. Well, Lola, thank you so much for everything that you've shared here today. And just, I suppose, to let people know, I can see your book in the background, Emotional Connection. EMCleaders.com is Dr. Lola Gershfeld's website, and there are so many different resources on that website. And you can contact either Lola or myself, Lola through her website, myself, niamhhannon.com. And get in touch if you're interested in learning more about it, if you're either interested for training or for your own business. Or if there's a conflict going on in your workplace that you'd like some help with, get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Niamh. Thank you.